It's a great honor and a privilege to introduce Yosef Waterman with your beautiful home here in Efrat in Israel. And Yosef, you originally come from Holland.
Yeah.
You could mention a bit about your family and
Okay.
your history.
First of all, I came to Israel only first I have to tell that English is not my mother tongue. So it may be that I make some mistakes. Don't forget, Dutch is my mother tongue and not English. Okay. My wife and me and the children came here only in 82. We came on Aliyah. And from I was born in 48, 3 years after the war, I lived in Holland and I lived a very good life. There was then, as far as I ever noticed, no anti-Semitism, nothing. I had a very good life. And the real only reason why I came on Aliyah was that I wanted my girls to marry Jewish people, Jewish husbands, and because of the Kehillah after the war in Holland was relatively so small, there always would be a good chance that they came home with a nice goy, and what could I have said? Nothing.
And where did you live in Holland? Which city?
What?
Which city in Holland? Where did you stay in Holland?
In Holland we lived in a small place. Afterwards I can also show you where my father was watching the Jewish cemetery. There is a very famous old Jewish cemetery which is in use until today for the Kehillah in Amsterdam. I went to school in the small village, and afterwards my high school I did in the Jewish high school, the only Jewish high school in Amsterdam. Afterwards I studied in Amsterdam, but that's not important for our story. I have to tell you that, of course, I had grandfathers and grandsisters that none of them were known to me because they were all killed in the Shoah. So I had never opa wa oma, never had a grandma and a grandfather from both sides. Let me first tell about my father's side, Mr. Simon Waterman. The name is another story which we don't read, but it's a very old name, and we found out how it came to be Waterman. Okay, not for now.
Now, how did it come? It's interesting.
It is in the 17th century. The water, the canals in Amsterdam were very polluted. There was no how you call it? No good drainage. It was not, and people threw all their dirt in the canals. The canals were dirty and stinking. And there was no tap water. In the 17th century, you couldn't open your tap. There was no, everybody got water from whatever. So my grand, I don't know which, went with his boat on the river that goes through Amsterdam. He went far away from Amsterdam where the water was still clean. He opened his boat, a kak with a cork or whatever. Water came in, he closed it and went with his boat to Amsterdam to sell clean water.
Wow.
And he became the water man. That's the story. I can't check it, but that's the story that I always, and it's logic, because we know that in the golden age, in the 17th, 18th century, the water in this town was very polluted. The canals were polluted. They had no real drainage system. Okay, but that's nothing to do with our story tonight. My father was born in a family, in that times the Jewish still had big families, of 11 brothers and sisters. Relatively a lot of them survived the war. I don't go in details why and how, but 6 of them survived the war, which was a huge amount, much more than regular. Don't forget that before the war in Holland lived about between 140 and 150,000 Jews. It was never a huge community, but 70% lived in Amsterdam, in the capital. And after the war, they stayed about 30,000 Jews. That means more than 110,000 of the 140,000 were killed. There is no country, even not Poland, where the number of Jews percentage was so high as in Holland. I can explain it, but I don't know if it's now the right place to explain why it was so high.
No, it would be very interesting because...
Yeah, you can cut what, of course, from all the story, whatever you want.
It's very interesting.
Don't forget, Holland is a small country. Holland is a very flat country. There are no hills, there are nothing. Holland is flat. Holland, before the war, till to now, is a very organized country. That means a real Jekke country. Yeah, everything is written down, everything is organized. That means when the Germans came in, it was relatively easy for them to see or to find out where were the Jews who were Jews. Because it was all very nice registered in the civil administration. Yeah, when you had a child, it was born, you gave it a name, you went to the area, to the city, and you said, I've got a boy that is called Jan Pieterse, he's born this day, and what was his religion was then, and then you said Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, so, and that was all in cards in Holland. Yeah, you understand?
Yeah.
So Holland was an organized country. There, second thing is, don't forget, oh sorry, is it disturbing?
Yeah.
No. For me it's a bit...
You just see the reflection.
Yeah, no, but I see a bit fake.
No, it's
okay.
You're doing great. Also the shuls, I'm sure the shuls, the synagogues had registers of the marriage.
There were also then already a lot of Jews not part of the Kehillah. Although they were Jewish. Don't forget those years was the rise of socialism in Europe. Yeah, there were a lot of very poor people, also in the Jewish community, who became socialist and, let's say, left religion. Although the registers as Jews, they did Brit Milah, and they let them, after that they died, they let them be buried in a Jewish cemetery, but of Jewishness all their life, nearly nothing. Maybe they went to Shul in Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, even not sure. So there was a part already for the war, a big part of the Jews were not acting religious, although they never denied being Jews. Mm-hmm. There were Jews in the administration of Amsterdam, yeah, in high positions everywhere. There was not any form of anti-Semitism in the higher echelons. There were Jewish ministers. There was, who didn't deny that they were Jewish. Now, why so high percentages were killed? Once the administration was perfect, the Germans only had to take the cards of the civil administration, where was written Josef Pompstock, Jewish, and there was his address and there was everything. Yeah, because that was a good administration. Second, Holland is a flat country, very densely populated till today. In a country that has the size about Israel, if you include Judah and Shomron, qua size, it's about Holland. Yeah, it's a small country. Then already there lived in Holland, then in the war time, 7 or 8 million people. It was relatively densely populated. In Holland there is no place, like in France, like in Yugoslavia, like in Eastern Europe, where you can hide. No woods, no natural mountain areas that you can relatively, like in Switzerland or in the center of France or in Spain or whatever. Holland is flat, everybody knows everything, and there is no place for natural disappearance. Okay? And that's the main reason why it was. And the Dutch didn't have experience of war. Most European countries experienced the First World War. But Holland in the First World War was neutral. The Germans didn't go into Holland. They went from Germany through Belgium, now France, they went to Italy, they went to other countries, but they left Holland, like Switzerland, neutral. And the idea in Holland was always, we will always stay neutral. When the Germans attacked Holland in the 10th of May 1940, there was an army, but the army was neglected. There was no modern weapon, because it was the time of why should we spend, we will be neutral. So Holland was conquered in 5 days. After that, the Germans bombed Rotterdam, and they said, if you don't surrender now, we'll bomb another 2 or 3 big cities. And then the Dutch surrendered. The Queen fled to England, and that's it. So that's the main reason why more than 80% or 90% of the Jews were killed in the war. Is it clear? Yeah?
The only thing is, I think Lithuania, the percentage killed in Lithuania was exceptionally high.
Was also high, but there was a big difference. A part, I don't say the biggest part, a part of the Lithuanians were from origin very anti-Semitic. There was always extreme anti-Semitism in the eastern part of Europe, in the Ukraine, in the USSR, what later became the USSR, in Latvia, in Lithuania, in Estland, in Letland, in all those countries, in Poland, it was always exceptional anti-Semitic. We know, for instance, that in Lithuania, a big part of who executed the Jews were not Germans but Lithuanians.
Yeah.
That never happened in Holland. It was so the other side around that when the Germans in Holland after 1 or 2 years started with their real hard measures against the Jewish, the Dutch populations went on strike. The famous February strike, that all the workers, it was a strike organized by communists, yeah, because also Germans and communists, that was, yeah, against the, but all the population, and it took 4 days, and the Germans broke that strike with killings, with whatever, sending people to the concentration camps already, also non-Jews, yeah, who were organizing. So, but all the population, and the motto was, don't touch our dirty Jews. Yeah, you understand? So there was never there was, but not openly. Maybe one guy told to the other, Yehudim, the Jews killed Jesus. But not, it was not public, it was not, there were never pogroms. Never in Holland. Holland was a liberal country. Till today you can say in Holland whatever you want. And you can do whatever you want. Yeah?
In fact, a lot of Jews escaped from Portugal and Spain. And
there were 2 groups. The one who in 1492 escaped from Spain and Portugal, came via Antwerp, via the south to Holland, because Holland was then already a very liberal country where they had no restrictions. And afterwards, in 1600, they came from the east, from Germany, the Ashkenazim, from Poland, because of the mostly pogroms and economic situation in those eastern countries that was very worse than in Holland. Although also before the war there was 80% of the Jewish population was poor, not rich, in Holland. Like the normal people. People were poor, you can't compare with today. My father, now to the family, if it takes too long, you tell me. Yeah, you can cut whatever you want. My father came of a family, very poor family, 11 sisters, brothers, 6 survived the war. About a part of them I know how they perished. One sister, for instance, who was not religious, my grandfather and mother were very religious, but one of their daughters became not, and she was fall in love with a communist, real hard, and he was arrested by the Sicherheitsdienst, by the SD in the years of the war as a communist, not as a Jew, he was Jewish, but as a communist. And its story goes that from the prison he jumped out of the window and died on the street from trying to escape his treatment. From the other brothers I know exactly, not by my head, but I know where they were killed, mostly in Auschwitz and 2 of them in Sobibor. My grandfathers from my parents' side, what I heard, because don't forget, I never knew them. This, what I know from my father. My father was not a speaker. My mother was paka paka. My mother was a real lady speaking. My father not. My father after the war had serious mentally problems with what had happened. Yeah, he was treated with a psychiatrist afterwards, but I give you an example. We lived in a small place where the cemetery was, yeah, Muiderberg, where I was grown up. Show you a picture. And he had, after the war, Tante Fietje, Ome Lewietje, he had 3 brothers and sisters in Amsterdam. And after the war, maybe he visited them twice. He was in very good relation with them. Phoned twice, 3 times a week. But for him it was very mentally hard to go to Amsterdam, because there he was born. I don't even know if he was born there. I think he was born there, he grew up there, he had his kehila, he was Orthodox like the, how do they call them? Aguda. He was real Aguda in those, also after the war. Even after the war, he wasn't a Zionist. He kept to be Aguda, like the old Aguda in Israel, who didn't want to take responsibility for the Zionist state. Till today there are no ministers of Aguda, only Sgan. How you call it? Deputy ministers. Okay. So he was very influenced by the war, much more than my mother. What I can remember, you can never know inside, but okay. So he never went, maybe 2 or 3 times, he went to Amsterdam, or 10 times, I don't know, but very few times. The village where I lived was 30 kilometers, and there was even a time we had already a car, so there was practically no problem. And he had brothers and sisters there, but for him it was hard to overcome the how do you call it?
It's like an emotional
to go and to see part of the places that were that were totally destroyed after the war. I'll tell you also why. And the other places that remembered him probably too much from these good times before the war. So my grandfather and grandmother were deported in, I think, end 42 from the father's side. Okay, that was a chair somewhere. I have 1 or 2 pictures from them from before the war, but not much. Most of
do you know where they were deported to?
They were deported to Auschwitz. Okay. What happened to them exactly, I have from the Red Cross. Okay, look. That was my father's side. So after the war he had 6 sisters, brothers and sisters, left from the 11, which was exceptional. Many people survived. Not my grandfather. My mother's side, which I know much more about, she came from a small agricultural fisherman's village in Holland. Small, we should call it in Ivrit a gor. How you call it in English? Hamlet, whatever. How they met I even don't understand, but look at you. She lived there in a small village, which I visited a lot, and the villages after that village, when 30 years ago, there was official tekkers, and they called the street after my grandparents in that village, till today. There is the Benjamin's Laan, the lane of the family of the Benjamin's family, because that was the name of my mother's parents. So we were there officially, blah 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 blah. They lived there, and there were in the total hamlet there lived 5 or 6 Jews. That was all. They had no tefillah, they had no Beit Knesset. For Beit Knesset, you had to go over the river. They lived on the river, over the river Rhine to another bigger village, and there was a Beit Knesset. They didn't go on Shabbos.
Were they religious?
They were religious, we should say today, light.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were kosher, they didn't work on Shabbat, but for instance, they didn't want to be mixed. How loud is exactly Shabbat? For them, it was 5 o'clock Friday afternoon, it was Shabbos, all the year round. You understand that? But they kept Shabbat, and here you can see my grandfather made even a Mizrach, what's called, yeah, to show where's the east and where's Jerusalem.
And that he did by hand?
He did it by hand. Don't forget, in those years, no internet, no this, no that. Yeah, long evenings, cold winters. What people had to do, to play cards and to read a book. And he made from, I don't know from what he copied it. He didn't know Hebrew because there are faults, no not faults, how you call it?
Mistakes, maybe.
Mistakes in his Hebrew. That's not important. So there was he living. His brother was in the same village. His brother was also married with 2 or 3 children, and my grandfather, who had 3 children. My mother, her brother, and her younger sister. Survived also relatively a lot. My mother and the younger sister. Her brother was killed in Auschwitz, and her parents were killed in Auschwitz. Okay. Now, let's start the interesting part. All is interesting is, my father was, before the war, working for the Jewish community in Amsterdam. He was, he made, wait, stop it a second. So they lived in the village. My grandfather had a business in old metals, yeah, and he sold and he bought and all that. In that village, we know exactly where. We visited the house. We, René and me, afterwards, we were nicely invited by the people. And my father had a job in Amsterdam. They lived then in Amsterdam. My parents, not my grandparents, but my parents. And my father had a job with the Jewish community as an undertaker. Don't forget, till 1942, the Germans let the Jews more or less their own lives. Mm-hmm. The real hard measures came during 1942, 1943. So I have even a picture that I can show you. It's interesting. But then we have again to close. It's also a story. If it's boring...
Not at all, please.
No? Okay. I came 15 years ago in Amsterdam. I was living already in Israel. My wife goes to a girlfriend, a friend of us, a lady. I said, I don't sit here with the Alte Bible the total day. I go to town. I go to town, go to a bookshop. When I was living here, and it goes through all kinds of books. Suddenly I see a book, I open it on a page, and I got a shock. I see my father in the war on that picture, which wow. I didn't know it existed, which I didn't know that book existed, which my father never knew that picture was taken. Yeah, because afterwards, even when my father died, I asked it, one of my uncles that survived, lived here in Jerusalem. I said, here, is this Shimon, your brother? Yeah, 100%. I have the picture here. So I'll show you it after. But that was so crazy. And also people said it must be a miracle. A miracle. I'm in Amsterdam, I'm living in Israel, I go to a huge bookshop because I have nothing to do, because my wife is talking to a girlfriend, Yeah, to a friend. I opened some books, Roman. I opened a photo book, Prague, on page 86, whatever. I don't go through all pictures, yeah?
Wow.
I open it and I got shocked. I see, it's my father. Wow. No doubt about it. And he walks in Amsterdam with a friend, the man also survived. And you see, jüdisches Viertel, ein Ankündigung, oh, how you say it? Now I go in German, that's not good. Announcement here in the street that he is in the Jewish quarter. Yeah, then I'll show you afterwards the picture. If you want, I'll show you now, then I have to stop and I'll show you now. Or do you want me to tell first?
Like we can tell, and then afterwards you'll show all the pictures.
That means because my father working for the Jewish community, he had relatively a long time what was called in German Sperre. Sperre was a notice, official letter of the German authorities that he was saved from being transported because of his work with the Jewish community that was still more or less functioning. Understand? That made it possible that my father and mother, living in Amsterdam, wrote to their parents, which were, both of them on both sides, deported to the transition camp in Holland. How it went in Holland, let's say in Amsterdam, they collected all the Jews, the Germans, put them in one place in Amsterdam, and from there to the train in Amsterdam, and with that train to a small place somewhere in Holland, Westerbork, it was called, that transition camp, and there people stayed. The one stayed there 1 week, the one stayed there a month, depending of all kinds of. And my parents write them in Westerbork.
Were your parents married by this time?
My parents married in 39, I think. That means a year or 2 years before the war.
And they were married in Amsterdam?
They married in Amsterdam, yeah. I was born only after the war. So my parents sent letters to Westerbork, to her parents and to his parents, and they got letters back. Because the Germans with, of course, Censura Maserberg.
Censor, it's a censor.
With?
Censor, it was censored.
Censored, yeah. But they write on and off, not only with my parents, with their parents, but also with uncles and with all kinds of people they knew, because they were still allowed to live in Amsterdam, although half of the Jewish population was already in Westerbork or to the east. You got it?
Yeah.
So that all kinds of papers that I show you on the telephone were part of this, all papers that, for instance, my grandfather writes to my mother in Amsterdam back, go to Mr. X and tell him that you order half a pound of meat. That wasn't meat, that means that the silver of them is there buried. It's by him. All kinds of insinuations or explanations that my mother knew what was the meaning, but that were not catched by the Germans as, understand?
Yeah.
Or my grandfather writes to my mother, go to the butcher in our village and ask him to give you a chicken. The chicken was meant to be, ich weiß nicht, I don't know. You understand? But okay. So there was a correspondence on and off from my parents to the transition camp in Auschwitz, in Westerbork. I have also a letter, I don't find it now, it is also in Lochamea Getaot, where they write, Dear Shimon, that's my father, and Lena, my mother. Interesting, my mother has a very Catholic name. That was probably, yes, anti-Semitism. And they write, tomorrow we are leaving to Poland. So we give you kisses and I hope we'll see and we will survive and we will this. But they write, tomorrow we are going on transport.
So they knew they were going to Poland?
They write to my mother, we are on the list for being transported to Poland in the train of tomorrow. In Westerbork, once or 2 times a week, there was a train that went from Westerbork to whatever. Yeah, to Auschwitz, to Sobibor, to whatever. Also that letter I had after the war, because my mother saved all those letters. You understand? Now it was so ridiculous, or not ridiculous, but tragic, that, and nobody knows, and my mother never told me, in 42 and 42, my mother writes a postcard. She writes, and I have here in the telephone, I couldn't find it, the copy, the picture of it. It's in She writes to the family Benjamins, her parents, Barak number 60, Auschwitz-Birkenau, Ober-Silesian, Poland. Was the first question. How did she know in 42, 43 that there was something that was called Auschwitz-Birkenau? And it was in Upper Silesian, the area in Poland where Auschwitz was. And she writes exactly. The post part comes back. Germans are Germans. Jecke. How you call it? Exact.
Precise.
Precise. Impossible to deliver. Big stamp of the camp of Auschwitz. German stamp. Boom. Gatima. How you call it?
A stamp. Like a postmark.
That card came back to my mother. Of course, she didn't know that it has no reason to write to Auschwitz, because she thought, like everybody then, that it was a working camp. That people, although they had their doubts, her father was already 60 plus, that was in those days an old guy, which had illness of this and illness of this. So how could she work? But they hoped they would survive, because otherwise she wouldn't have written to Auschwitz. And there's no reason to write to somebody if you knew he's dead. But she wrote, and she got a letter back. And that's one of the most interesting postcards, of course, that I got. So my parents, when my father, and mostly my mother was always the strong figure in that marriage, felt that my father's sperre, my father's official paper that he shouldn't be sent to the East, became worthless. Yeah, because at first they made those exemptions, and they made less and less and less exemptions. And when my mother felt, they found, I don't know exactly how, hiding places with Goyim, with non-Jewish, in Holland. They went through at least 7 addresses. Why 7? Because sometimes the people said to him, it's too dangerous. People in this village, small villages mostly, notice that there is somebody in our house, or that we buy more potatoes. And it's not only for the husband and man, that can be, they're not eating somewhere. So there was all kinds of indications that there were other people. And sometimes those people who were right, not from a bad point of view that they were treating them, but they said, listen, it's getting too dangerous. Don't forget, if you was caught by the SD, or by the SS, or by the Landwacht, or by the Dutch police hiding Jews, you were killed also. It's not that you get a penalty of 5,000 shekel. You were killed, no doubt about it.
And it happened.
And it happened a lot of Goyim were killed when the Germans discovered in their houses Jews.
A lot of non-Jews were killed, hiding
Jews, hiding communists, hiding British pilots who were shut down in the planes over Holland, and who fall with the parachutes into Holland. So the Germans also were looking for them. British pilots, criminals. You understand? They often were not together. One was with this family, one was that family. They often didn't know if she or he was survived, not survived, and there are also nice between stories. One day, my father was with an address, and my mother knew his address. And my mother, because she had a not Jewish face, she was blondini, she could be real Irish, real German, Dutch, and she has a falsified identity paper. Don't forget, also something, why so many Jews were killed? The Germans in the Anfang, because it's about German, I start to speak German. In the beginning of the war, made a special identity paper for all citizens of Holland, where it was your photo, your fingerprints, yeah, where you were born, your name and your religion. And the Jews got a big J in that passport, you can say. That means if you had passport with your J, forget about it. You would be catched. But my mother had in 42, 43, by the underground, got the falsified identity card without a G. My mother, I know exactly, was called Gewert Schouten, and my father was called Van Kriek or something. Yeah, okay. Also, these cards are I had them afterwards in Lochamea ghetto. So my mother knew at that certain point where he was, and I don't know exactly how, she came to visit him. And but there was family, which she didn't expect, family of the people who lived there. And afterwards my mother told me, it was written here, she said, one of the people said to the boss of the house, you see, I think they're looking to each other. Maybe they have special relations.
Wow.
Yeah, and my parents were sitting there, not denying, but of course not admitting that they were married. You understand? All kind of crazy. So my mother wrote that all down in that paper that got lost. For instance, my mother was once. I give you some examples. Yeah, I can't tell all the story. My mother was with a family, and the man was one of the big in the underground. So big in the underground that he had meetings with underground people in his house, which was of course very dangerous. Yeah, because if you were caught by the Germans, they knew by all their methods of the Gestapo how to get out of you, who were the other members, and you could forget about it. It was that bad that one night my mother was up because they had the meeting down, and my mother worked there as a cleaning wife, yeah, by that family. Took care of the lady was sick, tuberculosis, whatever. My mother was the housekeeper, how you call it, yeah? And there was shooting downstairs. Germans came in, and they were from the underground, and there was shooting between and my mother was hearing, because all was wood, was sitting up, and she hears the shooting, and she doesn't know who is killed, who is not killed. Are the Germans killed? Is the man who keeps the house? So after I went 2-3 hours, he came down and whatever. There are crazy stories.
And who was killed?
From both sides.
From both sides.
That's what my mother writes. There is another story, very nice. My mother comes from that small village. In that small village, everybody knows everybody, even worse than Efrat. Yeah, it may be a village of 10,000 houses. Mm-hmm. Before the war, everybody knows everybody. My mother had that falsified identity paper without the J and with the name Cornelia Schouten. In the middle of Holland, there are big rivers, 3 big rivers. My mother goes on her bike outside with her false to a village at the other side of the river. She has to cross the bridge to find food or whatever, I don't know. She comes on the bridge, and on the bridge are standing German SD and Dutch SD. Sicherheitsdienst. They ask him to show her the papers. My mother shows her a paper. He looks to my mother and said, "Not true. This is not your real name. Your real name is Lea Benjamins, and you come from Woudrichem. I know your parents, I know your brother, I know you from you were a small child, and you are not Gewert Schouten." So she thought, finito la commedia, ended, yeah? He was right. He was from another village, close to their village. The kids, in short, he recognized her. Not to be Mrs. Schouten, but to Mrs. Lena Benjamin. He looks to her, and he looks to the German, and they say something to the German, I don't know, and he says to my mother, "Go through." Oh, he knew her family, so he let her go. She writes in a letter that afterwards she had to change her underwear. She did from pachat, from
fear.
Fear, yeah. The guy says, "You are not this," she was Jewish. She had a falsified paper. She did all what was. She went over the river. The kids were, in short, she could forget about it normally. But the guy says to the German, "Haben Sie noch eine? Do you have a cigar or what?" He looks to the other side, and she.
He saved her life.
Huh?
He saved her life.
He saved her life. So also in that, I all the time looking for my spectacles. He said, so there were more stories. I don't tell them all, but these were the main, let's say, pikant, how you call it in English? The most interesting parts.
Even one or two more. It's fascinating.
She was still in Amsterdam, but the despair of my father, the paper of my father, that he was already worthless. It was 2 or 3, 4 days before they went in hiding, and the Germans opened the door, looking by everybody for Jews. And they sit in a closet, and for whatever reason, they don't open the closets. But normally they opened all the closets because they know the Jews try to hide. And her sister was there, and she writes in her paper how both of them were crying afterwards from happiness, and okay, all kinds of details like this. Once in already 44, I think, they were also both in small villages, hidden, yeah. Don't forget, they went from address to address. But every time you change address, it's a very big risk. But you don't know who is the news. The underground says to you, go there, yeah? Or they bring you there. But you never, is the neighbor trustable? Is the milkman trustable? Are the people where they're going to church every Sunday, are they trustable? What do the village know? Do the village notice that there is some noise in the house, even when, you understand, there are thousands of, and there are traitors, not only, there are people who are trying to find Jews for money or for whatever.
Informers. And they
Informers. So they went all to kind addresses. One day they went into the fields, into the bushes. They were alongside the rivers, there were bushes. And they were together all 2 nights without food, in those bushes together. All kind of stories. I don't continue. After the war, my grandparents were deported from their village to, and we know exactly the name of the policeman. There was a big discussion in Holland if you could publish those names, yes or not. because one side, privacy, and or other side, traitors. And traitors should be brought for justice. And it's easy to say kill them, but it's in a democratic country that was Holland after the war, it's not that easy, right? Where was I with the story? So her parents were deported, we know exactly by whom. Her brother was deported, died also in Auschwitz, and also from her parents' brother who was living there, he has also children, half of them were killed.
Well, what happened to the person that you know was responsible for the deportation?
I think nothing. We don't know exactly. Okay, if you can shut it now, I take 1 or 2 papers at the end, and I'll show you. Now I want to show you some pictures that I still have at home, which I didn't give to Lochamea Geta Art Museum. Here is a picture that was taken, I don't know, even I never saw it, with which year. No, it's not written, but it was taken before the war, before the Second World War. Like people who made pictures of their families. So they went to a photographer in the big city next to their village. And here I'll show you. Can you see it?
Very well.
This is my grandfather who died in Auschwitz. This is my grandmother who died in Auschwitz. This is my mother who survived and afterwards became my mother. And this is her brother that perished in Auschwitz, and that is his younger sister that survived the war and lived after the war from 50 or something in Israel. From 1950 till she died 10 years ago, she lived in Israel, my aunt Dodamina.
I'm just going to, 1 minute, I'm just going to zoom in.
Okay,
it's
enough?
amazing that this survived, that this picture survived.
Yeah, my mother had all this stuff in Holland after the war. It's amazing. I have a lot of antique. My grandfather dealt in old metals. So in the old metals he found all kinds of interest that he kept for himself. Why do I have all those things? From my grandfathers, and my mother hid it in the war with goyim under a chicken. In a chicken farm, under the ground, under the chicken's scheisse, the dirt of the chicken. Wow. Okay, I'll put it back on the table there. Yeah, sorry.
I'll take it. Okay. Now you were talking about the picture that.
Now, an interesting. Did I tell the story already for you? No. Where is it? Here. My wife and me, were living in Israel from '82. In 95, I don't know, remember exactly. We were on a visit in Holland. I have a sister and my wife has a brother. We were visiting, and my wife goes to talk all the day to her friend. I said, I have no patience to her all the Alte Katschke stories. I'm going to town. I go in a big bookshop and reading all kinds of novels. Oh, sorry. Reading all kinds of novels, looking like you visit. One of the books is there, a present from Holland. Yeah?
And you just picked it up?
I just picked it up to see what they tell about Holland. It's in English. In English or in Dutch? No, it's in English, you can see. I'll show you even afterwards. I opened this book, which has about 95 pages. And I got a shock, a real shock. People thought when I came to them I was white like how you call it? White stone, like limestone. Because I opened a book and see my father, no doubt about it.
You just opened it?
I opened it on a certain page, which I didn't know. I didn't know this book. I opened it by, like you open a book and you see nice pictures, yeah? Or not nice pictures, whatever. And I see my father. And I see a guy next to him, which I also knew. And I'll show you now. First I'll show you, and then you come closer, or you say me what to do to see the text. It's in English.
Could you read the text?
Yeah. First read it. This photograph by F.A. Stampf is given an extra dramatic tint by the two undertakers who were passing by. The National Front terrorized the Jews. The paramilitary organization of the National Front, also known as the Black Shirts, dragged the Jews out of the trams of the streetcars. In February 41, the Jews formed a fighting force. A massive fight broke out on a certain place, supported by the dockside workers in Amsterdam. Not only Jews, that's. In the fighting, one of the black shirts was fatally wounded and died later. The Germans retaliated by closing off the Jewish quarter. Yeah? All the bridges were raised, and later signs were erected with Judenviertel. That means quarter of the Jews. Like the one here in the photo from the Jodenbreestraat. It was a street called after the Jews. On 22 and 23 February, a large roundup took place in the Jewish neighborhood. 400 Jews were taken in Amsterdam. Workers reacted, or as a reaction of the February strikes that broke out. Mr. de Hond says, they took me out of café this and this on the Waterlooplein. 40 of us has to walk to a certain place and stand in 4 rows. 400 people were standing there. I stood there from 3:30 until 6:30 with my hands raised in the air. I was the only one of the 400 who were not killed. So here, you tell me if it's clear. You tell me if it's clear or not.
It's actually quite unbelievable. It's not that, it's not so obvious, to be honest.
No?
But you can see the two men walking.
Is it clear? Can it close?
It's incredible, yeah. And
Yeah,
this is in
it's-
Amsterdam.
Yeah, it's in Amsterdam. I know exactly the street. I know the street. It still exists. Yeah, here's even the chalet,
The sign.
the sign of the name of the place. Yeah, but it's written very clear. Joodse, you can also, you're African.
Yeah.
Joodse straat.
I'm just going to focus a bit more in on that.
Here. Judenstraße. Jewish straat. You see?
And which
And
one,
here, this is my father.
which
The
one
way
is your
he-
father?
This one.
The one on the...
With a cigar in his hand.
If we can just bring a bit closer.
The one with the cigar in his hand is my father. And it's taken in 42. That means 2 years after the conqueror of Holland. And in 42 the deportation started already.
You must have got the shock of your life just to open up a book.
I knew my father was working as a, how you call it?
Undertaker.
Undertaker for the Jewish community. That means in this time he still had his license that he shouldn't be deported. Understand? I see it. I see the way he keeps his, because also when I have a picture of him that he's keeping a cigar. He was always smoking a cigar. Exactly the same way he is smoking it here. There was no doubt about it for me. And I also know the guy that next to him, he also survived.
Joseph, can I just bring it a bit closer? Because this is
do what you want with
absolutely
it.
incredible. We're just going to show to our viewers. So this is the picture.
Now, you also read what's written at the back side of the book. In English. It's all in English.
It's all in English.
Read the back side. There, yeah. Yeah, there.
So if you could read it.
I can read it if it's my English not too bad. Ein Geschenk aus Holland, a present from Holland. This text was painted by the Germans on the side of the containers ready to be transported to Germany by boat or trains. The containers were filled with the household contents of Jewish people who were being sent to the concentration camps. In contrast to the two earlier books in this series, everyday Amsterdammers have sent in their own photograph with accompanying stories. This book had been strongly influenced by an uncommon occurrence during the war. Photography was severely limited during the war in Amsterdam. However, we have succeeded in portraying a realistic image of that years thanks to the cooperation of the Government Office for War Documentation and several amateur photographers, including a German photographer. This was made by the German photographer who wanted to show that life was normal. Propaganda. You see, the Jews are walking here, no wrong, nothing wrong. It was taken here, it's written. Wait. Here, the Amsterdam Historical Museum, several amateur photographers, amongst them a German photographer, F.A. Staff, working for the Germans in Amsterdam. You understand? They would show everything is alright, there is nothing wrong. And you see normal pictures of Amsterdam people in whatever.
We can just show one more picture of
here. This is also not a nice picture. This is a picture. Stop! I open again. A picture that the Jews taken out of their houses for
deportation.
You see? For instance.
Wow. And the title of the book is
A Present from Holland. Holland in the 40s. There is here Amsterdam in the 40s. There is also Amsterdam in the 50s, Amsterdam in the 60s. You understand?
A Present from
Holland. And it is a series. I take this one. I got crazy.
It's amazing.
Here, food distribution. It's how it was in Amsterdam. Here, the Swedish at the end of the war are dumping food in Holland that when the Germans was already. And here, there was so scarce about to heat up the house that between the tram lines there were blocks of wood. And the people were taking out the blocks to heat up. That's why I said also, you can see whatever you want.
I'll just show this. So they were taking the wood
for heating their house or for cooking or for whatever. There was nothing anymore. The Germans took everything to Germany. All the machineries, you understand?
It's amazing that the name of the book is called A Present from Holland.
Yeah, all the books. This is one in the 40s, but there is the same A Present from Holland in the 30s, in the 20s, in the here, for instance, here there's my father. Here you see a German soldier in the middle of Amsterdam. You understand it? Here, this was a big razzia where they took the Jewish people that he writes. We were standing in the row. Yeah, the Germans take, and they were all killed in Mauthausen. All of them. Yeah, that's. But somebody illegally made this picture because it wasn't allowed for Dutch people to make pictures. You understand? Because they were not allowed to. What?
Wow, we can just take a seat. That is amazing. And you never knew about this book?
No.
You never heard about the book?
No, my father, I'm sure he did.
Never seen
because
the book?
It was a German photographer from a window up who made a picture of the street. But he never saw the guy probably.
But the existence of this book, you never knew?
I didn't never saw it. Never saw it.
And is this book a popular book or?
No, but you can still buy it. Yeah. It's still in the.
And it's amazing. Do they have this in Dutch as well, or it was only in English?
I don't know. This is in English. I don't know if there's also a Dutch translation. A Dutch text, no.
But the chances that you'd go into a bookshop and you'd pick up a book and you'd open
that is what
like
we call
miracle.
Min HaShamayim.
It's from above, and you'd open the book to the picture of your father.
And I was
And you ever
standing. I remember me standing in the bookshop, holding on a chair or on something, and that. Because my father never told. He never knew.
He never knew about this existence.
No,
of
he
this
never
picture.
knew about the book. He never knew about that picture that was taken. Because it was a German photographer who stand in a house and make so. Here you can see that the place he's standing is or a little bit higher or maybe at the other side of the bridge.
Yeah.
He doesn't notice. Okay. Here's another book. I don't make it too long, we can make you crazy.
No, you can go. This is just unbelievable.
Here, there's a guy, a Dutch guy, we know him very well, he's still living, who wrote about those families in that Dutch village where my mother came from. And here's written exactly, this is my uncle that was killed. I was named after him. My name is Yosef. It was Joseph. It was the brother of my...
Let's just have if you can show... No, you can...
No, because it's far away maybe.
No, we can see... Wow. And you named after him?
I'm named after him.
And
my name is Yosef Yitzchak. Yosef was the brother of my mother, this one, and Yitzchak was the brother of my father, who also didn't get back.
And was he deported to, do you know where he was deported to?
Yitzchak, yeah, and also no.
Where was he deported?
Sobibor.
Wow.
And these are my grandfather and his brother in the village when they were already obliged to have the Jewish
yellow star.
Yellow star. You can see it.
Yeah. So there they had to, and it said,
but they were still in their village. And this is it's exactly written. It's written about my parents, where they went, where they were in the war, everything is written, but it's in Dutch, sorry. And then it's written exactly when did 6 or 8 weeks they were there and they died, and exactly where they died, in which. Here my uncle Yosef, he survived Auschwitz 30 days and then he perished because he was exactly 28th of February 43 he died. Here's written exactly.
And the pictures, they have pictures of...
What?
You have pictures in the book as well? The pictures.
Yeah, of course. It's not only about my family, but about the few Jews who were in this area.
Oh.
Yeah, my mother is. He interviewed my mother, he interviewed my aunt, Marina Carolina, daughter. She was with a family in The Hague, and her sister Lena Waterman Benjamins found a place there, Lomachine. It's all there.
And the cover of the book, it's...
Medina Stampers. The Amsterdam Jews called them from the Medina.
Can we see the cover? Wow.
And here I think, I put it from a paper that we were there in that village, and onthulling is the publicity of the street that was named after my mother. Here is my daughter, here's my aunt, here's my cousin that survived the war, and then the street was named after my grandparents.
And till this very day?
Yeah. There live people. There are people who are living in the Benjaminstraat 25A.
And you have a picture of your mother.
This is my mother. You do it. She was gingy. But she did have a Jewish face. She was lucky. So with a false identity, she could move around. My father couldn't put his nose outside because everybody saw he was Jewish.
It's amazing.
You understand? Big difference. My mother could move, my father not. And I tell you a nice, the words are not good. It's not a nice story, but no, my mother won't stand anymore. What's this? Tough tomorrow, dear. Her dirty hands from all those dirty books. After the war, when I was born in 48, so when I was small, my parents went with special events to the last family. They were together for a whole year in a small place in Holland. Henk and Antje Tromp.
Is it far from Amsterdam?
Yeah, far for Dutch, not for Russian or American measure, but for it's about 120 kilometers. And don't forget, in those days there were surely not in the war, no private cars because there was no petrol for private use.
Did they go by bicycle or?
No, after the war, what I remember is that we went to them always. On Christmas Eve, or when they had birthday, or
they kept the connection.
We kept always the connection, my parents. And my father told me, he was very emotional once, that after the liberation of Holland, he went to Henk, or they were there, and they said, Henk, all this time that we were with you, you had expenses. We didn't pay you because my father was a relatively poor man. He didn't earn much, and he had no Euroshot. Everything was gone. So he said, Henk, it's now after the war, I want to pay you. And then my father sent, he told me 3 times, and 3 times he was crying. He told me, and Henk said to me, you have to thank the good Lord who brought us together. Wow. And no penny. He said, you in your synagogue and I in my church will praise the Lord who brought us together. And I remember 3 times he told me, and 3 times he cried. And that my mother also wrote in that book, in that paper that was stolen, that the last thing he said, when they left them in 45, when they tried to go back to Holland, a story. Now, another story.
It's emotional, it's very emotional.
Wait. I think I've got it here, if not I got it upstairs again. Maybe it's all upstairs, but I know at least where it is, so that I can give you. These are Haggadot from Pesach. It's also interesting, but my father was Aguda. Before the war, he used the temple, the Bet Knesset in Amsterdam, and he had a man standing next to him who became a good friend of him during the years. Yeah,
in which synagogue was it? The main
in the Lekstraat, in one of the big synagogues. Still existing today, is still functioning. Of course, not the big minion anymore, but okay. The war breaks out. The man is married with a daughter. Next to him, his friend. His wife is transported. His daughter, which was 4 years, is brought to the underground. He doesn't know where. Yeah. They meet, I don't know where, after the war. And my father says to Saul, where's your daughter? What happened? My wife was deported. He says, I don't know where she is. I said, I'll try to find her. He via the Red Cross, via the underground. He finds her. And he says to my father, listen, my life is totally upside down. I have no work, I have no housing. Don't forget, it was not that easy in 45. Nobody got his house back. Yeah, not immediate, not all of them. Only if they were typical German cooperators. But if a normal family moved in for whatever reason, can you throw them out and say, I lived here before? It's all not that easy. In theory it's easy, in practice, in a democratic country, maybe they bought that house from, you never know from whom. Yeah? So if the buy was legal, you couldn't get back your house. There are all kinds of, it's not simple. So the guy says to my father, my life is messed up like 90% of us. I found my daughter, can he stay with you for a while until I succeed to reorganize and my life. My father says no problem. My parents had no children. It was 45 because I was only born in 48. Long story, that lady that became my sister stayed all her life with me, with us. I have still contact with her every 2 days. I phone, I call, I WhatsApp. She's living in Amsterdam. And she stayed by my father and my parents till she became 18 and went to live in Amsterdam, Lommershene. Yeah, no, it makes. But that I have always known her as my sister. Not that I didn't know the story. They told me the story. It's not that he kept it secret from me. And another tragedy was she had 3 fathers. Her own father, her father of the
underground,
and my father. And 3 of them died in the same year. Mina Shamayim. I'll put it off, I'll show her. And she wrote also a book, small book.
So this is actually your sister. Yes. Well, not your biological.
With my sister, who wrote.
And the name of the book is?
And the lady went away only with me. And she took her in her hand.
In Dutch, it's
in Dutch. You can understand.
And her father used to come and visit her as well?
After the war? We had a good relation with him.
And he was fine that she was staying with your family?
She was what?
He was okay that he was...
he was okay.
Did he...
Here, for instance...
No, we must sit.
No, but I'll show you. Here. That's from the LO, that's from the underground... and that's her name was unknown. She went to a family.
Can you show it if you can just turn it around? So that was from the underground.
From the underground, and they didn't want to write her name. Onbekend.
And how long was she in the underground?
I think from 43 to 45.
Did her father ever remarry?
After war, yeah. He remarried.
And he didn't want to. He couldn't take her in after he remarried?
It was never, because when he remarried she was already big.
Oh, okay, so it was...
And she was so used to be with us.
And you kept a very close connection with her all the years?
Till today.
Till today.
Here. She also got a false name because she was a Jewish girl. But they said Rotterdam was bombed in 40. So there was a lot of houses destroyed. So there were a lot of families without houses. And there were Central Evacuation Bureau. That means she had the name Loekie Molenaar, Schiedamse Weg, because she was supposed to be a fugitive of if they saw a small girl and said, who is she? She's one of the evacuees from Rotterdam Borderman. You understand? They used all those.
I'll just video. How much of Rotterdam was actually destroyed in the bomb?
A served, which was back because Rotterdam was not.
And you said your parents.
And also, we knew, my mother and me and my father. I also knew the under where she was. We called him Abba Peter because he was also a father.
And he would come and visit as well?
We would go there and visit. So all the relations stayed after the war.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And my sister went here. Was her grandfather, a real daddy from Latvia or something. Okay. Now this, a year or 2 years ago, my cousin, she comes here always. Now not for the corona, but she's 92, but she's 100%. And she wrote for her children here here you can say Ketubah Shel Horai.
That's the Ketubah, the marriage.
Yeah. He was her father. Her father was he was a Mohel, and you see all the children. And she wrote what was happening.
And could you show this picture? Because this is from the Red Cross, which I think it's explained the deportations.
Here is the Red Cross. I read it now in Dutch. If you don't
Dutch
understand.
Is fine. It's fine.
Naar aanleiding van uw brief van 1945 deel ik u het volgende mee. Israël Waterman, mijn grootvader, geboren 1869, Schoontje Waterman die, beiden op 6 april 1943 vanuit Westerbork naar Sobibor gedeporteerd en aldaar overleden. Overleden is Mila Yafa, Al-Khula Olamam.
He went to the next world.
Well, yeah, but no, they were killed.
They were killed. Murdered, yeah.
Deze inlichtingen verkregen wij van mevrouw Engel Wijnberg te Zwolle, de enige die van dit transport terugkeerde. Haisha Yehidashi Chazrami Auto Transport.
In English,
she gives the edut. She gives the how you call edut?
Evidence.
Evidence that the
testimony,
day of
testimony.
Yeah, and here all the family here. Yeah, here. Salomon Keizer transported 2410 to 42. All the family. Isaac Keizer, my grandfather, transported 24/8/42. This and part to this and part to Auschwitz. All the family. And that's the Red Cross.
Can we show it? If we can
I think so. I don't want to
Yeah. No, that's very good.
false.
Sure. And this is from the Dutch Red Cross.
Yeah.
After the war.
Okay. That's from her, from over her parents. That's her sister. They lived here in Efrat, her sister also. And also a nice story, which is here, bevrijding, how you call it, liberation. There's a photo from the Liberation Day.
Wow.
You see? Bevrijding.
That's liberation.
Free. The day we were free.
That was on the 17th of the 9th, 44.
They were in the southern part of Holland. Holland was free. The southern part was already free, and the northern part was still in Dutch.
And the young lady, that's her.
Yeah, here. Here, and she was with Tapelet, and that was her husband, Logeshu.
And your parents, Yosef, can I ask, your parents stayed
after the war in Holland.
But they were hidden right till the very
till
end.
45, till the bevrijding, till the liberation.
Till the liberation.
My mother told they were sitting on the roof and seeing the planes. The last week before the capitulation of the Germans agreed because there was a terrible hunger in Holland. There was no food, there was nothing. And in the big city they suffered terrible. People died on the streets from hunger. Yeah? And then the last 3 days the Germans agreed that the Swedish Red Cross would drop bread. And they sit on the roofs and wave to the Swedish planes who come in, I think in May 45, to drop food for the population. Yeah. Now I have another cousin, her brother, he still lives in Nirgalim, near Ashdod. And he, a year ago, went with his children and grandchildren to make a tour in Holland, where he was all the time. And he made a very nice film of it. His son, son or grandson, I son-in-law, I think his son. And we were invited half a year ago to see that film, and it was very emotional, very nice, very nice. But also she who wrote that letter can tell very nice. She doesn't always want, because it opens a lot of...
It's hard, it's opened many
wounds.
Very wounds and very...
Wounds that were... And we talked about it a lot, she always talks about it, but... And still today, when we were talking, and we talk about the war, it's clear that we're talking about the Second World War, no other wars. Although she went through all the wars here. And I remember that my aunt, the sister of my mother that lived in Tel Aviv, said, I had to laugh here. We in 49 or so had to make dark so that the Egypts wouldn't see Tel Aviv, if the planes came. She said it was so ridiculous, it was typical Israel. Half of it did it, half of it didn't do it, and she was used to dark in Holland because the Germans forced the people also to darken their houses in the night so that the British and Americans couldn't see if they were over Holland or over Germany. You understand? Because they didn't want to bomb Holland, they wanted to bomb in 45 Germany. There are all kinds of stories.
And Yosef, can I ask, having your mother speak a lot and your father hardly, what message do you think they've instilled in you, and what message would you give to your grandchildren and to the future generation?
First of all, because of that hundreds of documents, my mother didn't go through all of them, but 1 or 2 or 3. Yeah, to show. But she put away everything, and she said, after that I'm gone, you go and you have time, you're getting an old guy, go through all the papers and enjoy it. And a part is known to my children, but the longer it's away, the bigger part of the story goes away. You're losing it. And that's why I gave all the stuff to Lochamea. In Lochamea ghetto, there is a file of my family.
And do they exhibit it? Is it exhibited?
Huh?
Do they exhibit? Is it on show?
No, I don't think. They have a special Dutch department in Lochamea ghetto. And I can give you the name, and then you can see all those original papers.
But it's
there. It's a part. I call it South Lebanon. It's so on the border. Lochamea, you know where Lochamea got it? It's north.
But what message would you give to your grandchildren about the war and what you went through?
See what happened to the Jews. They know good, but see where your we are the grandparent. We have grandchildren already. That's a grandchild. I have even one married grandchild who is in the army now. So that they know what will happen. I told them, you don't tell us details what. Yeah, but in general the story was told, and they know. Zemayesh, that's what there is.
And having our own state, our own country.
Of course, that makes a big difference. They realized that life was not for the Jews, not always hallelujah. Yeah? Before the war, life for Jews in Holland was good. They were poor, but you could enjoy poor life as well. Yeah? If You don't need 3 televisions at home to be lucky, to have a good feeling, and you don't need 2 cars in front of your door. But mostly people were poor, and I said a big part was already assimilated before the war in Holland, and were fixed by were convinced by the socialists. So don't forget also that after the war, the communist was the biggest, much more important for the liberation. The communists of Russia, USSR, was much more important for the liberation and for the defeat of Hitler than the Americans. If you compare the number of dead in Russia with the number of deaths in America, it's 1 to thousands. Yeah. So, for instance, before me there was my parents had a child that died after 5 days, who was called Franklin, after Franklin Roosevelt. He died after 5 days. Yeah, and I was born second. He saved me to fast on. I'm not the firstborn. You understand? But a part of why the Communist Party was so big in France and all those, because the Communists were the fighters against the Germans, not the religious Catholics. Yeah, they were, of course, but as a group, the Communists was much more anti-fascistic. Yeah?
I see. Yeah, it's true.
And okay, so the Communists were seen also already before the war as communism is idealistic, right? Yeah, in those years in the 30s, when there was poor and there was inflation and there was whatever. So the communist solution was accepted, or the socialist solution even, by a lot of people. Yeah. There was even after the war a question if Italy would be communist or Christian democratic.
But I just want to ask you, Yosef, your parents, they were saved by righteous Gentiles.
Yeah.
Were any of
the last one, what I told you for, that the man said, you have to thank the Lord that brought, they got a tree in Yad Vashem.
So they were made righteous amongst the nations.
Yeah. I was there in the tekes, in the ceremony, together with my mother when she's still alive. And they were not there because they died already.
But it must have been very emotional.
Yeah, it was interesting. I remember. I can't find the tree anymore, but if I go to the administration, they will show me where it is. But it was in the 80s or whatever.
So you mentioned in the very beginning that a large majority of the Dutch Jewish community, unfortunately, were killed.
Yeah.
But there was a large, also disproportionate amount of Dutch that helped Jews as well.
That was the first story after the war. It is true and it is not true. Yeah. There were a lot of good people who helped Jews, but I always say, I always say, take the example that tomorrow Israel is conquered by the Russians. And the Russians say, all the Christians in this country we're gonna kill. How many of us, of the Jews, would open their house for the Christians, knowing that if the Russians got you,
they would kill you.
They will kill you. It's easy to judge when you are not in that position. Yeah. So before we judge all those people who did nothing, and we say which kind of people they did, it's easy to say for us today. I call that example. If Russia conquers Israel and say all the Christians we're gonna kill, how many Jews were ready to take a Christian in their house, knowing that the Russians? You understand? It's 100%. Not that.
It's not easy at all.
It's not so. It's not to us. I think it's not to us to give an order.
Or to judge. It's very hard to judge.
Because don't judge somebody if you're not in his place.
That's but that's the ethics of the fathers, sure. But it's true. I just want to thank you, Yosef.
You want to drink still?
No, just 1 minute. I just want to really, really thank you. So, Yosef, it's been the greatest honor and a privilege to hear and to see the history that you went through.
I still will find the material, and you gave me your telephone. But I can ask Jackie if I want it.
But I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's been a tremendous honor and a privilege.
And to hear the story.
You must continue telling your story and the story of your family to your children and grandchildren, because it is an exceptional story. And what you said, it's so true. To judge somebody, if somebody came to me and they said,
those Christians will be...
Or anyone, please help us, a Christian, Muslim, it doesn't make a difference. But if I'm caught, it would mean that not only would my family, but my grandchild, who we love so much, would be killed.
You would think twice.
I don't know what I would do, to be honest.
So that's why I say, don't judge too easily.
Absolutely. But your parents were very fortunate.
They were at least at 6-7 families, all of them,
and they put their lives, and they put their lives at stake.
They put their lives at stake. There is no doubt about it. And they were very religious Christians, very religious, because they were people knowing Bible, and it's written in the Bible that God made all people equal. And they had mostly a very Christian motivation for saving lives. You understand? Yalla,
thank you so much.
Een bij je.